What is going on, everybody? It is your favorite apostates. Happy Monday. I'm McKay.
I was like, what?
Who am I?
I was very confused. And I'm Jordan.
And we're back again after much annoyance from my phone right here. I'm going to switch that off. And technological issues last week. We're going to give it another shot. And hopefully this week goes better. And we're going to kick it off. We don't have any announcements or anything to say. So this little bit at the beginning is going to be rather short. Other than check us out tomorrow. If you're watching this on Monday, check us out tomorrow on the live stream. We'd love to have you. We just talk about
stream
crazy stuff. So it's off the rails all the time. Unhinged craziness. So
yes.
Catch us there.
We get asked questions all the time about second coming related things.
Apocalypse type shit.
Apocalypse, rapture, although Mormons don't really generally use that term. We get lots of questions about that. And when I was a diehard true believing Mormon, the second coming and the Millennium and all the other events that are tied to the last days by Mormon standards were very anxiety inducing for me. I came from a family who had a lot of anxiety and really a great fixation on the second coming. And so me being a person with OCD and anxiety was always very anxiety inducing for me. And so I spent a lot of time reading materials and things of that nature. I read many a book by many a prophet, many church leaders about this topic, the last days, the second coming, all that stuff. So we have a lot of information to talk about. This is a multifaceted, very complex thing.
Yeah. And none of it is really like concrete because you could have like the most competent person compiling a list of events and everything like that, and someone else can come in and say, no, you're wrong. Somebody else has said something different or conflicting and things like that. So it's kind of a hard thing to talk about because it's pretty open for interpretation. And I feel like maybe that is a common thread among a lot of people who believe in Armageddon and the second coming of Jesus and things of that nature, just because of the way that you can interpret scriptures and the way that like the book of Revelation is able to be interpreted and stuff like that.
In my opinion, I feel like Mormons don't spend as much time in Revelations. Like I got the basic gist of the seals because that, obviously directly ties in with what we're talking about. But in my opinion, we as Mormons did not spend a ton of time talking about Revelations. And there is a lot
Revelation. Singular.
Yeah. The book.
Somebody's going to say it.
The book. And so I think, like you said, there's also a lot of prophets who have made a lot of like different extrapolations about what's going to happen in the last days. So some people like are really hard on what Joseph Smith said about it, where other people are really hard on what like the current prophets have said about it. And so there's a lot of things. Now, back in the day, back in Joseph Smith's time, they were kind of, I feel like it was a topic more of discussion, like more regularly among people. Yeah. Versus now, you won't find any of like the church leaders or general authorities doing anything other than like hinting at it or telling you that we don't know when, but you need to be prepared.
Yeah. Kind of just touching, kind of just touching on the more like tame topics, like the gathering of Israel,
food storage,
and pretty non-tinfoil hat type things, really, because those kind of things really come off harsh, and they'll always use the milk before meat metaphor where, to the uninitiated, it sounds really weird, but like really to those who have been there for a long time, it also sounds pretty fucking weird.
Yeah.
So, we'll bring up a couple examples about that and everything.
But culturally, there is a lot of like differing opinions on these events. There are a lot of people in Mormonism who are very particular about certain things, and others who are like, oh, that's just like a cultural thing that's been passed down through generations of Mormons. And so there are some things that are pretty concrete, like as in they were in the Book of Mormon, they're in Doctrine and Covenants that we know like for sure. And then there's things that the prophets have said. And then you have the cultural piece
of speculation.
And things that other church leaders have said that maybe isn't canon, but they said it and people heard it. And so now people believe it. So before anybody comes in here and is like, oh my God, not all people believe that. I'm like, I get that.
Yeah.
I get that.
Which is why we start off like that. Which, I mean, it's really easy for the mind to want to speculate, especially when there's so much pressure about this topic being applied, where they're like, you need to be prepared because at any moment, like a thief in the night, he could come. So you're like, okay, well, I need to be watching and praying so that I'm not caught off guard and things like that. So people tend to want to dig into the signs and things that they need to look for in order to be prepared.
Well, and interestingly, I was raised on the idea that it would come, like, second coming would be initiated. Jesus would come back like a thief in the night. No one knows the day. No one knows the time, the hour, whatever. And so I was very much raised in that fact. But then I read a couple books that said, like, God's chosen people will know. Like, they'll know it's coming. Yeah. Whereas, like, what Mormons would term, like, Gentiles, the people who are not Mormons, who aren't aware what's going on.
The co-opted term Gentile.
Yes. Will not know, and they're the ones that are going to be taken by surprise. Whereas, like, the Lord's chosen people are going to be the ones who know that it's coming. So even that, there's some, like, widely speculative things about that.
It's crazy. There's a lot of stuff to go through. Just to start things off, I kind of just looked at a couple of the things that the church has put out there before, and it's kind of funny how it goes in like steps. Like I said, milk before meat. Like if you consult gospel topics in not like the gospel topics essays, but if you go into the LDS library app and you go under gospel topics, which I think, anyway, you'll get like a short list of what they say about the second coming and the signs, like really brief. And then you look at the gospel principles, which is the class that you would attend if you were investigating the church. And they kind of have a more expanded list of occurrences that will happen to leading up to the second coming of Jesus and everything like that. And then you have like the doctrines of the gospel class manual that are even more, and they get kind of more obscure and unique to Mormonism, I guess. Maybe not unique, honestly. I don't really know all too much about what other denominations within Christianity believe about the second coming of Jesus. A lot of this is based off of the book of Revelation and other biblical scriptures with a Mormon flair and interpretation applied to them. So anyway, the next thing that I was really looking for, and which mostly encompasses those things that I found in those other readings, was like a timeline. I wanted some sort of visual that I could put up on screen so people can kind of more visualize it. Listeners will do our best to kind of describe what's going on as we go down the line. So I found a timeline from a true believing Mormon and a fellow YouTuber, so I guess I'll plug his channel. This is Gospel Lessons on YouTube. He put together this little thing, and he does a lot of true believing Mormon type video essays and things about all these topics. I watched his little introduction about this timeline and everything. So let me just throw this on screen real quick. All right, so this is put together in Prezi. So it looks nice and everything, and he's got a lot of information in here, so a lot of it we're just gonna gloss over because we just don't have time to really get into it. I'll include a link in the description if you wanted to check this out. There's a lot of like links to videos and stuff that he's done, but there is a lot of reading that you can do just within this. A couple things I wanted to call to attention right off the bat. What he said in this introduction video that he has on there is he really emphasized this little bit of there are a lot of other topics that are more important than this one. And I think that's kind of by design because there's a lot of just confusion and not personal interpretation within this subject. So he really wants to emphasize the saving doctrines that they teach, that the missionaries teach and everything like that, because this stuff easily can just lead you down a rabbit hole that probably leads you to be like us, honestly. So there's that. I also like this little disclaimer at the bottom here. I'll probably cut our video so you can read it. It says, send corrections and additions to gospel lessons 1 at Gmail. Be sure to include acceptable references, which include the scriptures, the prophet Joseph Smith, and other modern day prophets while they were prophet.
Not while they were speaking
Not while
as
they
a
were
man.
speaking as a man, when they were just an apostle or something like that. So it's kind of funny the distinction that they make in that one. And there's a lot of arguments surrounding that, because we will bring up things from prophets when they were just apostles. They weren't quite the prophet yet, which is ironic because they are prophets, seers, and revelators when they are apostles. Oh, by the way, do not send emails to this. Do not do that. I'm telling you, right, like, dead ass. This is a nice little resource for us to use. Don't f that up, please.
He's very nice, I'm sure. Let him be.
Okay, this is kind of like the bulk of the empty space right here, starting with what Mormons consider to be the great apostasy. As I taught it as a missionary, which is how it should be understood universally if the missionaries are teaching that, the idea is that after the death of the original 12 apostles, the church that Jesus Christ instituted it fell into apostasy. The priesthood power to be able to baptize people and seal people for time and all eternity, I guess that maybe wasn't part of it, but the priesthood authority to do those saving ordinances was lost, which is why the Mormons consider every denomination outside of Mormonism, outside mainstream Brighamite Mormonism, really, to be false. Like, they have a portion of the truth. They don't have the authority to do anything for God. They don't have any way to perform saving ordinances, like to help people to return to God's presence. So, bar none, every other church out there is false by the Mormon standards. So this ushers in the time of the Gentiles, all the way from here leading up until the Millennium, basically, and the second coming. In that time of the Gentiles, you have the restoration of Jesus's church in the latter days, which is come to be known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or more commonly known as the Mormon Church. This is when that authority and the fullness of the gospel of Jesus Christ that was lost during the Great Apostasy comes back. And Joseph Smith just, man, where would we be without him? And that's when the sixth seal opens. And that's where we are right now, basically, in that. Now we get into the bulk of everything that's going on. And this is kind of a clusterfuck to look at. So we're going to do our best to kind of look at things. Latter-day apostasy is the idea that men's hearts will fail them and people will depart from the faith. I would imagine that other people, other denominations of Christianity also believe that. That comes from 1 Timothy.
The idea, I feel like, with this is things will, like most, I feel like Christian denominations are under the impression that things will get worse before they get better. So at this point, everything's like on the decline, like in the world, even in the faith. People are leaving the church, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so there's turmoil going on outside the church. There's turmoil going on inside the church. And when I'm referring to the church, obviously, I'm meaning the Mormon church. They don't really count other Christians because they haven't been baptized in the Mormon church.
Yeah,
They're not being exalted or anything like that. So if you want some scripture references, they have some. I don't know. We're not really going to get into that. But here's where the real stuff starts, where we're talking about. And this stuff, I feel like most of it is pretty common. This is basically where the similarities start to kind of diverge from what the norm is. There's a lot of signs that people believe are the end of times right before the second coming of Jesus. Just to name a few, Wars and rumors of wars. I can't tell you how many times I've heard about that. And when you really consider human history, it'd probably be easier to count the times where there weren't wars than there. You could probably just count those seconds and it would be a lot less than the days of wars among humankind. The wicked slay the wicked. Fires and vapors of smoke. Desolating scourge, which... For desolating scourge shall go forth among the inhabitants of the earth, and shall continue to be poured out from time to time if they repent not, until the earth is empty, and the inhabitants thereof are consumed away and utterly destroyed by the brightness of my coming.
Sounds like fun.
Sounds like a loving father, you know? Spiritual darkness covers the earth. I think that kind of encompasses the idea that men's hearts will fail them and people will be leaving faith and everything like that. Earthquakes in diverse places.
Oh my God, that one gets referenced all the time too.
Gospel shall fill the earth, which is where we start to talk about Mormonism. They believe that missionaries going to every nation on the earth is a sign of the end of times. So whenever they open a new mission in a country that previously was inaccessible, the Mormons, they go bananas. They're like, oh my God, we're getting so close to the second coming. Holy shit. And yeah.
They say that about
They say that all the time,
but
honestly.
Especially with temples. Like in countries that
I remember
haven't had one before.
Recently, within the last 10 years, they were talking about how there are branches of the Mormon church in Cuba, which is funny that that is like such a big thing for them. I remember there was also a lot of hubbub surrounding when I was on my mission in Honduras. There was a guy from Honduras who was called to serve in South Korea, which apparently was some sort of end times prophecy where people from Latin America are speaking Eastern languages and things like that. Just blew my mind. We were all just so blown away by that. But yeah, isn't it funny how, like, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 out of 13 out of 17 of the scriptures listed in here come from Mormon sources. So, and then they'd probably just kind of use those biblical sources as supplement and interpret them however they want. This one is a fun one. He didn't have anything really about this one.
Which is shocking because I've heard it 15 million times in my time as a Mormon.
Seriously. So, is this a Gospel Topics essay? No. But basically, Joseph Smith said that in the end of days, the U.S. Constitution, funny how that is a marker of what's going on in the world, the U.S. Constitution would hang by a thread. So when things like that happen, where the constitutional rights of people are coming into question, they'll say, oh my God, the Constitution's hanging by a thread. Obviously, that's when constitutional rights are like the Second Amendment and taxing churches and things like that come into question.
Like there's been at
stuff that affects them.
I feel like there's been at least one talk about this at every conference. Most recently, when we left the church, the most recent one I can think of is David A. Bednar gave a talk about it. There's one that I remember from Oaks recently who gave a talk about it. And it almost always is in the context of religious freedom.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, usually when the First Amendment is called into question, people are like, it is hanging by a thread. Jesus is coming fast. Let's see what Ezra Taft Benson said here. Ezra Taft Benson, of course, famous anti-communist and hater of the civil rights movement. Too often we bask in our comfortable complacency and rationalize the ravages of war, economic disaster, famine, and earthquake cannot happen here.
Who thinks that?
Seriously. To those who believe this are either not acquainted with the revelations of the Lord, pray tell, friendo, or they do not believe them. Those who smugly think these calamities will not happen, that they somehow will be set aside because of the righteousness of the saints, are deceived and will rue the day they harbored such a delusion. Fucking A, dude.
He's such a kind
Why do you
man.
have to bring in other people's... why do you have to bring mental health into this, my guy? So those are what... I mean, that's just a brief rundown of what the signs of the time are supposed to be. Which, I mean, a lot of these are pretty far-fetched. I would be really surprised. But a lot of these you can, like, fire and vapors of smoke. I mean, we have forest fires all the goddamn time. But guess what? It's not anything that is divinely sent or anything like that. It's because we are shitty. Like, we are a plague upon the earth and we are destroying it. Demonstrably. There's no question in that. Yeah, so watch out for those signs of the times because they're creeping up on us real fast. So as the signs of the times kind of move along, we end the time of Gentiles, which I just wanted to read some of these quotes real quick because they are kind of a little odd. This first one comes from Wilford Woodruff, who was sealed to a 6-year-old who passed away to take her as his wife. Just wanted to put that out there before we started.
6?
Yes, 6-year-old. Looking good, friend.
Do you want me to read it?
Go for it.
The gospel is now restored to us Gentiles, for we are all Gentiles in a national capacity, and it will continue with us if we are faithful until the law is bound and the testimony sealed. And the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled, when it will again revert to the Jews, whom the Lord will have prepared to receive it. They will gather to their own land, taking with them their gold and silver, and will rebuild their city and temple according to the prediction of Moses and the prophets. When this time arrives, which is nigh, even at our doors, let the Gentile nations who reject the gospel which is now sent to them prepare to meet the judgments of an offended God! ! For when their cup is full, even to the brim, the Lord will then remember the chastisements of the Jews, his favorite people, and at whose hands they will have received double for their iniquities. Woe unto the Gentiles, for who have administered afflictions to the Jews for these many years. For the awful calamities spoken of in these books, the Bible and the Book of Mormon, will certainly befall them.
Kind of a hot take, considering the amount of people who believe that the Holocaust was punishment for deicide. And then, back to my fave. Sorry for the jump scare there. President Ezra Taft Benson again. The Lord has designated these days in which we live as the time of Gentiles. Luke 21:24. The Gentile nations are so-called Christian nations, North and South America, and the European nations from which many of us come. The phrase time of the Gentiles refers to that period of time extending from when the gospel was restored to the world to when the gospel will again be preached to the Jews after the Gentiles have rejected it. So I think they're already preaching to the Jews every chance that they can. They were, as we've spoken before, baptizing Holocaust victims, posthumously baptizing Holocaust victims. I'll put a link to that up in the corner if you want to hear about baptism for the dead. There's a couple things I wanted to touch on here which are kind of wild. The first is the 2 witnesses thing. So obviously we're just speaking from a framework of Mormonism, which also is kind of made unique because this specific thing in the book of Revelation was addressed by Joseph Smith in section 77 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which kind of appears as a Q&A type situation. So the question asked, because a lot of people were confused about this part of the 11th chapter of the book of Revelation, what is to be understood by the two witnesses in that chapter? And Joseph responds and says, they are two prophets that are to be raised up to the Jewish nation in the last days at the time of the restoration, and to prophesy to the Jews after they are gathered and have built the city of Jerusalem in the land of their fathers. It also says in that 2 prophets will be slain and resurrected in Jerusalem, which is kind of an odd detail and is kind of implying that the Jews will be wicked to slay these people who are preaching the truth, quote unquote.
There's speculation obviously about who the 2 will be, and anytime like they allow or not allow, anytime they set apart people in the 12 who were younger, I think it always in the back of our minds is like, oh, it's going to be one of them because they're younger, and by the time that happens, it'll probably want to be you know, them. 2 of the 12. It's going to
be them.
So there's a lot of speculation, like sitting there thinking like, ooh, which of the 12 do you think it's going to be? Like, do you think it's going to be Holland? Like, there's
really,
a lot of
the 15.
The 15
could be any of them.
It could be any of them. So there's a lot of talk about that. But there is one quote in particular from Bruce R. McConkie, who was a former prophet, apostle, saying that somebody asked him who, like, if there's any indication of who the 2 that will be slain would be. And he identified the 2 men. This is a quote that says, followers of that humble man, Joseph Smith, through whom the Lord of heaven restored the fullness of his everlasting gospel in his final dispensation of grace. No doubt they will be members of the council of the 12 or the first presidency of the church. So they at least know specifically it'll either be the first presidency or the 12.
Yeah.
So
can't be 2 randos. It's got to be some of those guys. So
there you go.
I guess watch for them if they're booking flights for 2 of the apostles to go to Jerusalem. Apparently that's when Jesus is coming back. So keep an eye out. This apparently is supposed to precede, and the same hour there was a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell. And in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000, and the remnant were affrighted and gave glory to God in heaven. So that comes from the book of Revelation 11. So, yeah, I guess it's going to be... I guess that is biblical, that idea. But the Mormons take it farther and say it's going to be one of their guys. That's kind of shitty for those guys who get called to it, and then they're like, Lord, is it I?
Yeah, that's what I've always wondered.
Am I the one who's going to get killed by people?
Exactly.
I'm just going to skip Armageddon because that's a really convoluted but pretty common idea. But the final signs of the times, which are also kind of outlined in the book of Revelation, you have the great earthquake, which I think, Jordan, you have some insight on from a different source.
As far as the earthquake goes, in Utah, there's kind of this idea that, like, the big one is coming.
Yeah.
Like
that's like a scientific thing, though, right?
Yeah. I mean, generally.
Jordan had to take a whole ass class on it.
I did take a class on earthquakes in college. It gave me great anxiety. And that was prior to the, what was it that we had here? Was it a 5.7?
I think so. Yeah, back in March of 2020, there was a decent earthquake.
It was huge. Here. Like, I know for some of you California people are going to be like, oh my God. But it's been...
for us, for a person who's like never been in an earthquake in their entire life.
And I was sitting on the ground when it happened. I was sitting on the floor. So that was great for me. I was also pregnant. So everything was really great then. It was a really rough time for somebody with anxiety. And we felt the aftershocks of that one for months. Yeah. And so there's always this idea that because of where Utah is in the valley and everything, that a big earthquake is due to come. And I think what they say scientifically, the maximum strength earthquake expected in the Salt Lake Valley would be a 7.3 magnitude, which, knowing what a 5.7 was like, I would rather not. No, thank you, please. So part of this like rhetoric around the great earthquake is the Salt Lake City Temple, which is like Mormon pinnacle, right? So they have closed the Salt Lake City temple for renovations until, I think, 2025.
Yeah.
And this is the first time it's been renovated in a long time. But the main reason that they said for renovations was they were going to upgrade, essentially, the seismic issues that the temple had. And so they are, like, re-upping the entire base. It looks totally crazy now. Yeah. Like, it's, like, completely almost disassembled. It's whack. So basically what they're doing is a lot of stuff that I don't understand as a layperson who doesn't know anything about constructions or earthquake or seismic things. But essentially the whole purpose, and this is an article that I can link from the Deseret News that said basically what they're installing at the base would take the energy out of a 7.3 magnitude earthquake. And so with the renovations, the temple would feel it as like a 5.1 or a 5.2, which it already withstood with minor damage as far as I knew. So people, ourselves included, when they announced that they were going to close the temple for renovations, and renovations are going to be done in 2025, the idea is that the earthquake's coming after 2025 because then the temple will be shored up. And so we were like, we got to get out of Utah before 2025 because we don't want to be around for the 7.3. So
the big earthquake, the big one.
But yeah, I digress.
That's kind of more of a cultural thing where people are like, oh my God, it's a sign of the time. They have to upgrade the seismic capabilities of this 100, well, I guess it's not 150 years old, but it was started 150 years ago.
It's old. It was built all the way back then, so renovations are probably needed anyway.
Yeah. So, the great earthquake, you know. The heavens are going to roll up like a scroll. I shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. The guy included a picture of an atomic blast. I don't know if that's what he meant. Heaven shall shake and the earth shall tremble. So I guess he is kind of...
Maybe that's what it's going to feel like. Blast. I don't know.
Who knows?
I mean, that also just could be reference to another earthquake, too. The heavens and the earth will shake. I mean, isn't that the whole... That's kind of redundant.
The heavens don't shake in an earthquake.
Maybe that's why
it's called an earthquake. Not a
Maybe
skyquake,
they do, and we're just dumb and don't know it.
Mountains to valley, or valleys to mountains and mountains to valleys. I mean, that would be pretty wild.
This is funny. So now we got to talk about this for a second.
Great. We got something else to talk about real quick.
So on another tangent, there is a book that was written by a Mormon man, by two Mormon men, one of which who had near-death experiences, multiple of them, where he had a vision of all the events of the second coming, what it's like to transmute from a body to a spiritual being. And so he had like these crazy visions, and he apparently told an apostle about it, and the apostle was like, you have to publish this. And so with the apostle's permission,
I'm gonna say nope. Probably not the case.
So he wrote this book. It's called Visions of Glory, One Man's Astonishing Account of the Last Days. Obviously, it is from a legit Mormon perspective. There's not a whole lot of like general Christian or Catholic ideas in this book.
Here's why I'm going to say that this is definitely not the case, because the guy is not named. He is anonymous.
We figured out who he is, but he remained anonymous for the book. So essentially, the man who had the visions paired up with another Mormon guy who wrote the book. So they wrote this book together, and the dude who had the visions signed off on it. It reads very much like a story narrative. And so it goes like in great depth about what's going to happen prior to the second coming, what happens during, and there's a lot of crazy fucking shit in this book. Like, we could read this book and you would, like, sit there with your mouth on the floor the entire time, because I shit you not, it has the wackest things you've ever heard in it, okay?
And it was so popular here in Utah.
It is so popular. I read it when I was a Mormon, and I didn't take it as canon, but it was very anxiety-inducing for me. And I felt that there might be some truth to it, because this apostle was like, hey, it's cool. Like, you need to publish this.
I don't know. It sounds iffy.
A lot of Mormons have read this book. A lot. It is...
Well, and it was published and sold at Deseret.
At Mormon bookstores, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this
was... Up until recently.
Yeah, they pulled it. It's not anymore. And the author's dead, and it's like a whole thing now. But anyway, so this is read by a lot of Mormons, and there are a lot of Mormons who believe this, like, really in depth. And so there's this, like, crazy, like... amount of people who believe that this is like what is accurately going to happen. But anyway, it's also very like send you on a tangent of like some really weird and bizarre things based on this information. Like if you're familiar with the Chad and Lori Daybell case, the two of them read this book and took a lot of their like prophetic things that they talked about from this book.
Man, everybody in this freaking religion just plagiarizes off each other.
Which is just kind of sketchy. So by and large, it's a really weird thing. But in this guy's vision, he talks about a lot of things as far as like things breaking up and like, you know, just weird like geological things. So in this book, he says, prior to the second coming, an earthquake will open up a narrow canyon approximately where the Mississippi River is now. Though it deviated eastward, the Mississippi presently merges with the Ohio River. It followed the Ohio into the Great Lakes. The Ohio River and the remainder of the Mississippi River rerouted itself into this canyon, and it created a new lake and river system approximately where the Mississippi River is now. This canyon essentially created an eastern and a western United States, which figured into some international intrigue later on. So then in his little like spirit plane that he's doing, he flew over the lower part of California and toward the Gulf of Mexico. Almost all of California was in ruin, with the less destruction further away from the coast. I saw that a great landmass had risen up into the Gulf. It extended from Mexico to Florida and consisted of a few large islands that replaced the water of the Gulf. I did not think to look toward Cuba. In some places, the new land met Mexico, Texas, and Florida, but there was also a large waterway separating most of the new land from America.
That's fucking weird. I remember as an elementary school, and this was not in like a Mormon context, people saying that, like, oh, there's water. If you go deep enough underneath California, there's water underneath, and it's gonna break off and fall into the ocean. Like, what the fuck? Which this is kind of contradictive because Bruce R. McConkie, we mentioned a little bit earlier, former Mormon apostle, believed, based on, and I'm just paraphrasing, that all of the continents would be reunited again.
Pangea
2. What up? That's badass. That totally just kind of defies everything that I would have thought. But, you know, anything is possible with God, don't you know? So that's weird that California is going to break off and then it's going to be reunited with everybody.
Yeah, so like California is just going to bust off into the middle of the ocean, and there is just some weird things, and there's also a weird thing that we'll get to in a minute. But
why California? Is it just because of the fault and the fact that it's just like this den of iniquity or something like that?
Probably. There's so much geographic shit in here that it's, you know, they said that Utah was all messed up because the fault that runs along the Wasatch Front had like dramatically shifted, and so there's just like all kinds of weirdness going on in here. But anyway, mountains are going to turn into valleys. There's no reason to keep that up. I'll be interested how I edit that. Make it not annoying. This also seemed kind of inconsistent because in Joel or Matthew, one of the two, they kind of, one of them's like, oh, the sun's going to be dark and the moon is going to turn blood red, like it's shown here. And then in other ones, the moon will be darkened as well. Who the hell knows?
So which is it? Honestly, who the hell knows? It's going to be like a permanent blood moon.
This one always concerned me. Like it is very like frightening because people are like, the moon's going to run with blood. And it's just like very frightening to a person.
It's going to run with the moon Quaker's blood.
For real.
Red. Islands flee. They're just running away.
Maybe this dude wasn't that far off.
Yeah. That one seems like it's biblical. I mean, they kind of flee like in a really slow fashion. You just look at the islands of Hawaii. They like really slowly over time.
Maybe that's what they meant.
Maybe. Great hail. This is already happening in Colorado. I swear to God.
This happens in Colorado all the time.
Every fucking year. So, interesting. The final signs of the times seems like it's going to be pretty convoluted, just like everything. Another really big belief that the Mormons have, and this might be obviously not. There's a lot of stuff that's not unique here, but the gathering of the lost 10 tribes of Israel, and this is biblical, obviously. I will bring them from the north country. I think there was even Mormon pseudoscientists who believed that there was like a great wall of ice separating the rest of the 10 tribes of Israel from us for a long time, which obviously that's not the case.
So also in the Mormon Second Coming lore book that I was talking about, there's a lot of theories on where some of the lost tribes are. There's some bizarre ass humans like Rod Meldrum who've got some very weird theories on where these people are. And so in this book, it talks about how this dude, is being shown all these things. And so they traveled in his little spiritual state for weeks beyond the U.S., past Canada, around Alaska, and up into the Arctic regions above Canada. So there they passed islands, went through narrow channels, and were far enough north that they should have been in harsh Arctic weather, but there was no snow on the ground, and the land they passed showed new growth of grass and bushes that had not been there before the tribulations and the earthquakes and everything. So he goes into this thing and says it's not really winter anymore and the seasons have changed. And then they arrive at a place where the sea crashed against almost vertical cliffs. There were 3 rocky peaks of gray blue stone, and it was a clear landmark that they were in the right place. A man-made road had been carved into the face of the cliff that climbed from a rocky beach into the middle of the 3 peaks. And so they're behind some islands, and then they essentially land in what they believe to be where some of the people are. And so the temperature...
Has this guy ever heard of like satellite imaging? Or
he said in a climate change...
I feel like we would have noticed this by now.
Probably. Because of what had happened, that it had been ice for several millennia, but since the temperature of the earth warmed, the ice melted, and this place that we had not known was there had become accessible.
Okay.
So that's where they find some of these missing people that Mormons have speculated about where they are. So apparently they're up in an ice cavern.
We didn't know that they were there. I mean, we can find oil that's in the earth that we can't see, but
there's people down there.
There's people living in a place that we haven't been able to see ever before.
Yeah, so there you go.
It's pretty far-fetched. Obviously, I know that we don't know everything, but
it's kind of funny.
Is it more likely that there are people living in the North Pole who are just in this bubble covered by ice, or is it more likely that is not the case? The 10 tribes of Israel. We kind of talked about the temple in Jerusalem, but they're going to have to build a temple in Missouri. So there's the temple in Jerusalem, but have you heard of Temple 2? If Temple's so great, why no Temple 2? Well, they're going to bring that around because Christ is going to appear in Zion when the second coming happens. And this is kind of where Mormons definitely diverge in this point, because the idea is that the second coming is going to be like a collection of events where he's going to appear to multiple people. The first being, I guess this is in chronological order because obviously why would you not go west to east? It's just Christ appears at his temple in Zion once it has been built and before the end of Armageddon in Jerusalem. So Jesus is going to appear to the Mormons in Missouri, Jackson County, Missouri, in the temple that they have built as the New Jerusalem, the center of the New Jerusalem in the United States, before he goes over to the real Jerusalem before the end of the Battle of Armageddon. So that's the first thing. Then this one is a little concerning. Again, we're talking about our boy, Ezra Taft Benson. He says that another appearance of the Lord will be to the Jews, to these beleaguered sons of Judah surrounded by hostile Gentile armies who again threaten to overrun Jerusalem. The Savior, their Messiah, Who's the Messiah? Who are we talking about here? Their Messiah will set feet on the Mount of Olives, and he's going to save them from the falling at the Battle of Armageddon, apparently. So Jesus is going to come and save the Jews, and I guess that is going to help them to believe in Jesus. It just seems like this feels really odd to me.
Yeah.
This was something that we're getting into the splitting hairs bit where people don't really discuss this. And when it is, it's like an argument between
a bunch of old white dudes,
theologians and stuff. So I don't know. And then there's the last one where Jesus appears to everyone. There's like a million of white Jesus pictures depicting this, where a bunch of angels and everything will come down and usher in the millennium.
Well, and there's also lots of like lore about what Jesus is actually going to be wearing, because people are like, no, it's not accurate that he's going to be wearing red. No, it's not accurate that he's going to be wearing white. It's going to be red.
He's wearing white, and here he's wearing white, and
but when he comes,
he's wearing red now, I guess.
When he comes to tell everybody that they're he's going to be wearing red, because that's like more
menacing
aggressive
or something like that.
I don't
know. So that ushers in, what do we got here?
A half hour of silence.
The half hour of silence in the heavens between the 6th and the 7th seal, apparently.
For a half hour.
For a half hour. I guess that's following the opening of the 7th seal.
But who's counting?
Yep. And then this is where Mormons kind of... So after Jesus comes, he ushers in the day of the resurrection. This is where Mormons start to feel a little bit better than all the other people, because they're going to be the first ones who get resurrected after those people that died around the time that after Jesus was resurrected, never got the Mormon gospel and things like that. So they get to come forth on the morning of the first resurrection and feel cool for themselves. After that, the righteous people who didn't, who maybe were led astray from the Mormon church, but they did good things, get resurrected. And then your other people get resurrected and everything like that. So everybody gets resurrected. Except for the wicked people, I guess, the sons of perdition, and ushers in the millennium, which is this portion here. A lot of shit's going down in the millennium. Something that I did see on an LDS article, which I was unaware of, is that not everybody's going to be Mormon, apparently. So Jesus is going to be basically the government of the world, and not everybody's going to be Mormon.
You didn't know that?
Supposedly. I didn't really understand that. No.
Really?
No.
I thought that was like one of the cool things about Mormonism, because I was like, oh, during the millennium, not everybody's going to be Mormon, so it'll be like less pretentious.
You telling me the true Mormon Jesus is going to come to Earth and they're expecting that everybody is not going to convert immediately to the true Mormon Jesus? That it seems a little inconsistent with their
but concretely,
what they're saying.
The millennium is like really important. Like they talk about the millennium all the time.
Yeah, it's a huge the last 1,000 years before we all ascend into heaven or whatever.
It is a period of peace and righteousness, and Jesus is personally there and Satan is bound. And so there's a lot of like, can't wait to get to the millennium because nobody will be being deceived by Satan. So,
but all those other false churches, they're not. So I guess they would exist for just a minute up until the moment that they could get baptized, because Satan isn't deceiving them that their church is true.
It's true.
So
it's true. Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. But in this time, it's pretty widely held that, like missionaries are going to be going out and converting people, and children that have passed away before they were able to be raised by their parents will be, they'll be resurrected and you'll get to raise your children. Those who didn't get married and sealed in a Mormon temple, they're going to be able to find their eternal companion because everybody will be resurrected. There's a lot more fish in the sea suddenly.
It's true. But the main thing, as the family history expert that I was during the time that I was Mormon, the millennium is like the final piece of the puzzle for doing ordinances for everyone. And so the whole purpose that the millennium is so long, and the whole purpose that it's after the second coming, is because all those ordinances that we've taught you guys about, like the baptism, the initiatories, the endowment, the sealing, all of those need to be performed for every single person that ever lived. Okay?
After Jesus died.
Correct. So the idea is that the millennium will give people enough time to do all that work, because that's what we'll be focused on. Like each and every one of the Mormons, that'll be like our task, is to work on those things.
That's kind of the reasoning behind why they're constantly building temples, because the idea is that they have to have enough, to be able to do all of this shit, which you're talking about an incredible amount of time that it would take everybody. And supposedly billions of people are being resurrected to be able to do this.
Correct.
But
it's
a lot of time.
That's why when Mormons are like, oh, I've traced my family lineage all the way back to Adam, like that's the whole point. That like everybody back to Adam will have all this work completed, point blank, period.
Yeah, it's got to be the fathers turning or the children turning their hearts to the fathers, or whatever, like the scripture of Malachi. So there's a lot of talk. Usually when we talked about this kind of stuff, there's a lot of just glossing over of the second coming, the Armageddon, and everything like that, because they more want to focus on the time of. It's supposed to be a great time of happiness, because the Satan has been bound and can't deceive us, and
everybody's
all of the
just
wickedness
chilling.
has been cleansed from the earth, and
if you lost any loved ones, like you're all together with them, like it's really appealing in that sense.
Super appealing. So they focus on those kinds of things and not the death and destruction, and you better be ready, because if not, you're getting cast down, or you're getting cut down and cast into the fire, which is obviously what we don't want to do. So you have the people, kind of like two camps. Basically, there's people who kind of focus on the fear, death, and destruction to be able to maintain their faithfulness, and then the people who focus on the good and the millennium to be able to focus on their faith. And I feel like I was the latter of the two, because a lot of this stuff I really didn't read up on. Even when I was a missionary, especially because I didn't really have much access to anything other than physical materials to learn about things. And moreover, those kind of topics were not something that we were supposed to be focusing on, because you're just supposed to be focusing on stuff to indoctrinate people.
I had anxiety, so I read about it all the time.
Yeah.
I brought it on myself.
That's why books like that Visions of Glory book that Jordan has been sharing little excerpts from are appealing to people, because it kind of offers some sort of sense of control.
Because I know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So the millennial, like the millennium time for the most part is supposed to be like a positive, like everybody's happy, everything's great, Satan's like away, and we don't have to worry about it.
Cool.
And Jesus is there, and we're all just like chilling, and so it's great. And then towards the end, there's talk of basically what is like the Great War, or the final war, and things of that nature. So essentially what happens is towards the end of the millennium, Satan will be loosed for a period of time. So Satan's out of the cage, or whatever Jesus had put him in. So then Michael, Archangel Michael, who is also Adam
in Mormon theology, if you've seen the temple videos,
will lead the righteous Mormons in a final battle against Satan and his followers. And so while the millennium is this peaceful time, there's also a great element of anxiety, because people are like, the war is coming. Like, ultimately, we're going to have to fight Satan and all his little followers in order to usher in basically the end, where we've got Judgment Day, and then where everybody can live peacefully wherever they land, basically. Yeah. As far as the battle goes, everything is foretold that Satan loses the battle, all his followers lose the battle.
The bad guys lose.
The bad guys lose. The good guys win.
Who could have thought?
Satan and his followers who rejected Christ and the gospel will be cast out to outer darkness, which we've talked about many times before.
The sons of perdition.
They are known as sons of perdition because they've committed the unpardonable sin, so they cannot be saved. So
that's my goal.
We get cast out into a separate planet, and we've got to stay there, and there is no...
Not even a planet. It's just fucking like outer space,
Outer
apparently.
space, basically,
just
is what
darkness.
it's thought as. So,
no stars, nothing.
And then at the close of the millennium, all the work for all people prior up to Adam is done and complete. Then the earth will receive its glory, right? And we get ready for the final judgment of human souls. Judgment Day.
Judgment Day. That's where you're going to be judged for your actions and assessed your worthiness to enter exaltation in the celestial kingdom or any of the lower kingdoms.
There isn't a lot of talk in Mormonism about Judgment Day other than it like being what precedes going to like where we're supposed to go.
Yeah.
Like there's not like, I don't know if it's like this in other religions, but there's no, like, I don't even know of any lore like around that. Because I know that some people are like,
everybody just has their own headcanon surrounding it.
I think they do. There's no like, but there's no like widely accepted Mormon thing, like even like culturally that I can think of, like with Judgment Day. Like in other religions, I've heard that people are like, oh, like you sit down and they like play a movie of your life and like.
Yeah.
I don't think
Just
there's anything like that other than somebody who's like personally adopted that. But there's no like overarching Mormon belief around Judgment Day that I've ever heard.
Yeah. Other than Jesus being the intermediary.
Yeah.
It's kind of, at least for me, is just kind of whatever you thought about it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's...
Nobody really ever said anything.
I mean, it's scary enough in and of itself. Because, I mean, you're going to be judged, but then if you're a worthy Mormon person, like, you're going to get into one of the levels of heaven, presumably VIP heaven, right? Like, that's where you want to go. But even if you're, like, a super shitty person, then you're still going to go to, like, the bottom level, and it's still going to be pretty good. So, I mean...
Better than outer darkness.
So...
Yeah, my understanding about the judgment was that you would be so embarrassed of your actions that you would wish that the mountains would collapse on you or something like that.
That's fair.
So
then the earth
joke's
becomes...
on you. I have no shame whatsoever. So
then the earth gets celestialized, as in the celestial kingdom, and everything is beautiful and returns to its, I don't know, maybe former glory.
Celestial glory.
I don't know. But it's supposed to be
celestialized.
You know, the earth, God sets the earth on fire and we start over.
I think in Doctrine and Covenants, they kind of describe it to be like a sea of glass.
Oh, well, there you go.
So everything is sharp, apparently. Make sure you bring tough shoes if you're going there. Yeah, man, it's...
So there's a lot of, like, as far as, like, signs goes, there's a lot of things that Mormons have, like, checked the boxes on. Like, there's quite a bit.
And they're pretty quick to check boxes. Like, I'm sure with the wildfires, especially those ones I think it was in 2020 in Australia, where it was just burning like nobody's business. I mean, a lot of the signs are so ambiguous that anything that you see in the news could really check some of those boxes, like wars and rumors of wars. I mean, they were probably checking that box back in the time of the Vietnam conflict. They were probably checking that box with U.S. involvement in the Middle East and everything like that. And you could check that box now with Russia's involvement in Ukraine. And it's just so broad in a lot of cases and things like that.
Well, and it's easy to put things together.
Yeah.
But the big things, so like in my opinion, the things that like I would ask like my very spiritual leader Mormon men family members like about it, and I would like try to gather all this information so that I felt more in control and I felt better about things. And so what it like with all the information gathering and all the books that I read and everything, it basically for me came down to like three things. So we have the foretold proselytizing in Israel, which they are not allowed to do currently. They have a temple, not a temple. They have an education center. What do they call it?
Oh, the Jerusalem Center.
It's called a Jerusalem Center. It's like basically an educational spot
It's
for Mormons.
Yeah, it's really pretty exclusive. It's hard to get into that program, but it's like almost like a study abroad kind of situation where they
do tours in there and shit, don't they?
Yeah, I knew personally one person that was able to do it. And like they went to the pyramids of Giza at one point, and just a lot of the sites in the Holy Land as it pertains to Christianity. So
they're not, like, based on their agreement with Israel, they have the Jerusalem Center there, but they are not allowed to proselytize.
Oh, yeah. I remember they told us, and it was super strict, which I mean, it should be everywhere, really. No proselytizing, come on.
That's number one. Then the temple being built in Jerusalem, that's number two. But in my mind, number one has to presumably come before number two. Yeah. Hello. So
that's groundbreaking, Jordan.
It is. Proselytizing a temple in Jerusalem, and then the whole which prophets get slain in the street, or which apostle gets slain in the street in Jerusalem. So after the Millennium, in our Visions of Glory Insanity book, this person continues to have a vision in the time after the Millennium where he's viewing the Earth from outer space, and the Earth has been moved to a new location far beyond the galaxy that we call the Milky Way.
This guy did some fucking psychedelics and somehow landed a deal with the Mormon bookstores. Because what the hell is going on here?
And apparently this had been accomplished by the same folding process that had placed the Earth in its mortal rotation around our sun.
Bro, is he talking about wormholes? That essentially, on its face, is describing a wormhole.
He calls them portals.
You really think you're slick, dude. You really think you're slick. That's that's literally the idea behind a wormhole. Holy shit.
So there's that fun part. We could do like a whole 16-part episode on Visions of Glory and what insanity it is. Like, there's a meeting that happens when things are going to be turned over to Jesus prior to the Millennium, where everybody gathers in the conference center after the big earthquake
in Salt Lake City.
And all the, like, it's only a select number of people, like a select righteous group of people that are invited to this conference that's being given by the church. And so the regular 12 and the first presidency are all there, but then there's other people that are up on the stand getting ready to talk that people don't recognize. And the first one that they see is Joseph Smith Jr., who's there, and he comes up and gives a speech. And then there's Jesus himself, who shows up to this meeting and confirms everything that Joseph Smith said and gives a speech. And apparently Brigham is there as well. So there's just like... There is some whack-ass shit in this book. So if you want...
If you can't tell, I never read this, and holy shit.
It is freaking crazy.
I cannot believe that they allowed this book to be sold at Mormon bookstores.
I mean, really, in all seriousness, it could probably be like Mormon sci-fi at this point.
Seriously. That's probably what they're like, that was just fiction. The guy's dead anyway, so we don't really have to talk about that.
So there you go. The dude who had the visions is still alive. The author who wrote the book is not. He was not so anonymous that people don't know who he is. There are quite a bit of people that know who he is and have talked about him. So I think it's like more widely known now than not. But nonetheless, so the second coming of the Mormon God is nigh. So make sure that you are right.
Make sure you're observing the signs of the times. Keep a little checklist and make sure you check off a thing a day just to be sure.
Get out your checklist.
Get out your checklist. It's coming. And we kid a lot, and I realize that this is probably a lot of overlap with other denominations of Christianity's beliefs and everything like that. And I mean, it does sound odd from the outside, you have to admit, if that describes you. The Mormons have their own kind of specific stuff that they keep exclusive and will hold over other denominations' heads as, oh, well, we are the one true church, and you have to convert to Mormonism in order to be exalted. Everybody's going to be saved, but in order to be exalted and living in the presence of God again, you have to follow our path and play by our rules and stuff like that. So,
well, and people take it very seriously. Like, there was somebody who asked us, I think like a month or two ago, why so many Mormons were moving to Missouri.
Yeah.
And it's because that's where the temple, is supposed
to be. Yeah.
Is supposed to be built.
Like, if they retire or whatever, they will pack up everything that they've had for the last, most of their lives and move to Missouri, because that's where the second coming is going to be.
That's where Jesus is going to come.
That's where the New Jerusalem is going to be. And they have to be there anyway.
Because they're going to help build the temple.
That happens.
Yeah. So that's why there are a lot of Mormons moving to Jackson County, Missouri for fun, Yeah.
So if you live in Jackson County, I'm sorry. That might be pretty annoying for you.
Get ready for an influx of Mormons. But I mean, if the prophet, if Rusty said tomorrow that Mormons need to pack up and move to Missouri, you would see the majority of the Mormons pack up and move to Missouri.
Anybody who could.
So.
Anybody who could would. So.
Powerful stuff.
Powerful stuff. I mean, we believe this wholeheartedly. Yep. Some of it was information that was not really too pertinent to what I needed to know. I was more of the impression of, I just need to be ready myself and I don't need to worry about what's going on. So I didn't really concern myself too much with this kind of stuff. Obviously, other people were a little more concerned. And that's okay.
Like my mother. My mother was very concerned and fixated on this as well.
Yeah. And honestly, it's nice to go through life and have some perceived notions of knowing what's going to happen. Because when I left Mormonism, I gave that up kind of voluntarily, and I will be the first to admit that I don't know what's going on, and sometimes that is kind of a scary thought to me, and a lot of other times it's just I'll be here now, and whatever happens
There's a lot of things that I know there's going to be some Mormon, mark my words, who's going to come in here and be like, you guys didn't even touch on Adamantiama, and you didn't even touch on the Lamanites, and you didn't it. I know. Otherwise, we'd be here for 3 fucking days.
Yeah.
So,
we're just
shut up, sit down.
If there's anything that you would like to hear more about.
Yeah. Feel free, and maybe we can address it at some point. People wanted to hear more of the whole situation as it pertains to pre-existence and Earth life and post-Earth life and everything like that, but we just wanted to kind of more concentrate on what's supposed to be coming up and what's recently happened. So this very much scratches the surface.
Yeah. And it can be pretty wild to think about, especially from the outside looking in. I'm like, wow.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of things that we talked about that you guys are like, what? So
what?
Yeah.
I'm going to keep it brief at the end of this one because I feel like we've kind of run a little bit long. If you like what you're hearing, if you would like to hear more about Mormonism and the thoughts that go on in our brains that probably shouldn't be spoken, you can hit the subscribe button. If you're just listening, you can just save our podcast and you'll get the new episodes that we do every week. We appreciate it. Everybody who supports us is amazing. We cannot believe that so many people want to hear about those things that I was talking about just a second ago. If you'd like to support us, we have a Patreon. We do exclusive content. We do exclusive live streams and watch parties and stuff like that.
Ad-free content.
Ad-free content. You can get access to it by going to patreon.com/Jordan McKay. And people were asking last time, what are those names? These are the names of our patrons that are coming up in the middle of the screen.
Look at how
shout
cute
out
they
to
are.
all the patrons. Oh, I love this one in particular.
Cutie.
Awesome. Thank you. We also have merch. You can find the links in the description for our Etsy store, Happy Brain Collective, and our Teespring. So go check those out if you would like to peruse what we have. We also have our socials, TikTok and Instagram. You can find us on both of those at Jordan McKay to keep up with us on other platforms. And finally, our Discord. Discord is sick. Pop in. You can find the link in the description, and you can join an awesome community of awesome people that are more than just us, more than just former Mormons or, whatever like that. It runs the gamut of people with experiences. So we love that. Well, thanks for holding out until the end. If you did, we appreciate it. We love you. And we will see you soon.